became the guardian, he couldn't execute all of the provisions of the divine plan right away. He had to build up our capacity, right? In fact, I don't think that he gave sort of national plans even for something like 16 years after he became guardian. Finally, 16 years later, he felt like some of the believers in some of the countries had enough capacity and enough understanding to start to do things more systematically and together, collectively. Right? So he had educated them for many, many years, right? Brought them up, and finally then he gave, one plan to Iran, one plan to America, one plan to Great Britain, one plan to India. And then other countries started coming on. He gave another plan and another. And when they finished that plan, he gave another. And most of those were about opening countries to the faith, remember? Spreading the light of Baha'u'llah to other regions and territories, buying property, forming assemblies, learning more about publishing, and so on, learning more about the faith, and so on. Little by little, he started building up our capacity up until, it was maybe 1952 or up to 53, when all of these plans sort of concluded, these national plans and regional plans. And then he said, I think we have enough capacity that we can engage in a global plan. All of us working together. Because remember, Abdu'l-Baha said, and for those who are translating, this is number 17 in the quotations. Abdu'l-Baha said, one cannot obtain the full force of the sunlight when it's cast on a flat mirror. But once the sun shineth upon a concave mirror, or on a lens that's convex, all its heat will be concentrated on a single point, and that one point will burn the hottest. So when we really work together, all focused on one thing, it's a great force. And so Shoghi Effendi brought us all together. And and I think in the first 11 months of that plan, that 10-year crusade, we opened over 100 countries to the faith. And it was a great victory. And when the House of Justice was elected, right, soon after they were elected, they announced that there would be another plan. And then there was another plan. The House of Justice even said there will be successive global plans even into the Golden Age. Continually unfolding the divine plan for the propagation of the faith throughout the world. So now, what's happened is that since the House of Justice started giving these plans in 1964, one after another, I won't go through all of them, it continued to focus on us building up our capacity. And finally, really not too long ago, the House of Justice said the foundation of the faith is firmly established in the world. And every country was open to the faith. And in some places in the world, there had actually been large numbers of people coming into the faith. But we couldn't sustain the large-scale growth like that. And so finally in 1996, they said, now we need to dedicate a series of plans to learn about large-scale growth. How to carry that out systematically. They said all the things we're doing, the summer schools and the deepenings and firesides and everything have to keep going. We have to keep all those things going. But the way we're operating right now isn't adequate for large numbers coming into the faith. So we have to learn about that. And then they told us about clusters. They said, now that every country's open to the faith, we want you to divide the whole world into clusters. So we did. 17,000 clusters in the world. They said because with these, they're bigger than just a community, but smaller than a country usually. But it makes the planning and managing growth manageable. It makes it manageable, right? So then we started thinking, well, clusters will do what we have to do. And now the House of Justice said, at this point, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But they said by 2011, we need 1,500 of these clusters to have established intensive programs of growth where they're self-contained, sustaining large-scale, organically sustaining large-scale growth. Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we need at least 1,500 places on Earth where this is happening. And I think in this region, covered by the countries attending here, it's 35. We're going to contribute 35 of those, 1,500. We've already got, as the House of Justice said, we've already launched 18. I won't say established, but we've launched 18, right? Because we're learning as we go. You know, don't you think that this has always been the case in the faith that because even when the Guardians said go out and open these countries to the faith and build a house of worship, and we just said yes. Whatever the head of the faith said, we said yes. And we always accomplished it, right? But we didn't always understand everything. I remember even, some of you may remember there's this one wonderful story of this man. His name was Yazdi, and his family was living in the Holy Land during the time of Baha'u'llah. But Baha'u'llah said, you'll have to go, leave the Holy Land with your family and establish a base in Egypt. And they moved to Alexandria. And initially they weren't very prosperous. They called themselves good-for-nothing Baha'is. The whole family, they used to laugh and say they were good for nothing because they were all clergy before becoming Baha'i, so they lost their jobs when they became Baha'i. And they said we were good for nothing. But they, little by little, they engaged in selling some things, and eventually they really became quite prosperous. And what does a clever Persian guy do when he becomes prosperous in Alexandria? He set up a branch office in Akka. So he could go there on business. So he's in his branch office, right? He's in his office in Akka, and Abdu'l-Baha comes to him and says, Baha'u'llah wants you to go to Arabia. He said, yes, of course, right? So Abdu'l-Baha says, close your shop, and he says, with your permission, I'll go to see the Blessed Beauty and get his blessings. Abdu'l-Baha said, there's no time. This ship is the last one leaving. Take whatever money you have and go. So he closed his shop, took some money, jumped on the ship, and left. And it wasn't until he was out at sea that he realized he didn't ask why he should go to Arabia. So he's praying up the storm, he's praying and praying, oh, Baha'u'llah, please help me understand why I'm going, what I'm supposed to do. Right? Even there was but he was so confident that because he was sent by the head of the faith, he would be successful. In fact, there was a storm, he said, and all the Muslim pilgrims were crying and screaming and saying they'd saved all their life to go on this pilgrimage, and now they were going to die at sea. And he says, don't worry, I'm on a mission for Baha'u'llah. He was so confident, even though he didn't know what he was supposed to do. When he arrived in Arabia, he still didn't know. He was praying, walking up and down on the pier, just praying, thinking, please help me. And then he heard somebody speaking Persian. And he turned, and here's this, in fact, the same person I mentioned earlier, Haji Mirza Hyder Ali, Isfahani. He had just been released from something like 10 years in prison in the Sudan, in the desert. He was penniless, but Baha'u'llah had promised him, promised Hyder